The Nintendo 64 was responsible for bringing some of the greatest game franchises into 3D for the very first time. Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time are two of the most influential games of the era, perfectly translating the 2D formula of the previous titles into a three-dimensional space. However, out of all franchises to launch on the platform, none are as strange or divisive as Castlevania. A few weeks ago, I released a video discussing Castlevania's history and its potential future. First off, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who supported that video. It means a lot to me. You guys are clearly passionate about this series, and you also are very passionate about how much you dislike the animated show.
Are you dictating your fucking obituary to me, Belmont?
Many of you pointed out something I completely skipped over, the 3D Castlevania games, and honestly, you're right. Part of that was intentional. I wanted to focus on the classic 2D timeline first, but another reason is I've actually never played any of the 3D Castlevania games. So today, we're going to rectify that. I played Castlevania 64 and its expanded version, Legacy of Darkness, to finally answer one question. Was Castlevania 64 actually good? Castlevania 1999 was developed by Konami Computer Entertainment Kobe for Nintendo's newest home console, the Nintendo 64. Konami's Tokyo division released the now critically acclaimed Symphony of the Night in 1997, and at the time, the game was brushed off and seen as inferior due to being a 2D pixel-based game in an era where 3D was all the rage. So the new N64 game was the chance to finally bring the tense platforming and difficult combat into 3D. When Castlevania finally released in 1999, it was actually met with a positive reception for the most part. However, as the years passed and online discussion grew, I saw nothing but disdain and hate for this game. People complained about its clunky movement, awkward camera, and just poor level design. Like I mentioned before, I hadn't touched either of these games till this video, despite owning a complete in-box copy for a couple of years now. While Symphony of the Night revitalized the series, Castlevania 64 is more akin to the classic Vania games like Castlevania 3 or Super Castlevania 4. You control your character, gathering power-ups, avoiding traps, and jumping across platforms, all while whipping, or shooting, every demon in your way. It's simple, and the idea sounds like it'd work rather well in a 3D space. At least on paper. Like I said, for this video, I'll be looking at both Castlevania and its prequel re-release, Legacy of Darkness. Both games share the same overall characters and story, with the second game actually adding a prequel campaign. This game takes us all the way to 1852. You have the option between two different characters, Reinhard Schneider, heir to the Belmont clan, and Carrie Fernandez, heir to the Fernandez clan, which are actually related to the Bonades clan from Castlevania 3. Both characters' goal is to, you guessed it, destroy Castlevania and stop the return of Dracula. Both characters traverse through mostly the same levels, though there are instances with levels unique to each character, like the Tower of Execution being a Reinhardt-only level, or the Tower of Science being a Carrie exclusive. Throughout the game, you'll meet a variety of different characters that tie into the narrative. Charlie Vincent, a self-proclaimed best vampire hunter. Yeah, I don't think you're outclassing a Belmont, dude. Renon, a demon who serves as a shopkeeper for you to spend all your gold. And this small child named Malice, his village having been burned down. There's also a few characters exclusive to each character. Rosa is met in the villa by both characters, but she primarily ties into Reinhardt's story. While playing as Reinhardt, you're met by Death himself a number of times. However, Carrie meets another one of Dracula's disciples, Actress. Atris? I don't know how to spell her name. A witch working to resurrect the Dark Lord. These characters do have some charm to them, however they don't appear very often, and when they do, it's usually to offer 3 seconds of plot dialogue or the very few times there actually is character development. Where Castlevania 64 really succeeds is in capturing the tone and atmosphere of the original games. For an early 3D game, they managed to create a very nice looking gothic fantasy world that can sometimes be actually creepy. There's even a bit of survival horror DNA here. Locked doors, hidden keys, and quiet, unsettling rooms feel straight out of Resident Evil or Silent Hill. The level diversity here is actually pretty decent. Each level feels distinct and does its best to try not to blend in with each other. And as for the soundtrack, it's an interesting one. Castlevania is known for its iconic and catchy melodies, and while Castlevania 64 does have some great tracks that return from past games, a majority of the new music takes a more ambient, atmospheric approach, which actually ends up working pretty well. It isn't as memorable as some of the other titles, but it does a good job setting the mood for each area. The game starts you out in a foggy forest outside the castle gate. This is where the game lets you start exploring and get used to the controls. The N64 controller is notoriously weirdly shaped, and I'm honestly impressed they got every action on here without it feeling cramped or awkward. Running around using the stick feels smooth, and there's actually a bit of weight to your character, which is a very nice touch. Both characters have 2 attacks, and they're returning sub-weapons from the previous games. Reinhardt gets the classic vampire killer whip, which is great at just about everything, though it doesn't have a very long range. Carrie, on the other hand, uses these magical orbs, which are okay, I guess. They travel very slowly and can home in on enemies, but I find it to be way less reliable than using the axe or the cross. Holding down the R button lets you target onto whatever the nearest enemy is, and for the most part this works pretty well. It gets a bit tricky when you're in a group of multiple enemies, but I find jumping can usually help redirect your attack. In most Castlevania games, hearts are your ammo source. However, in Castlevania 64, they decided to go with red jewels, kinda like Bloodlines in the Genesis. I'm not sure if this is because in both games you're playing as someone other than a Belmont, or they finally decided hearts just didn't make sense for ammunition, but whatever, they serve the same purpose. Each level is filled with the usual Castlevania fare: skeletons, bomb skeletons, skeletons riding motorcycles? Wait, hold on, how the fuck is a skeleton riding a motorcycle in 1852? Motorcycles weren't invented until 1885. One of this game's underutilized mechanics is the status effects. You can actually contract vampirism, as well as poison, from getting bitten too much, though this is easily cured with an item. Each stage also has its fair share of platforming puzzles, and I gotta say, this is probably where most of the frustration and jank comes from. Platforming has always been a staple mechanic in every Castlevania game, and when translating it to 3D, the developers at least tried their best at making it work as well as possible. Holding the A button down when jumping from ledge to ledge lets you grab onto it and clamber up. It's actually pretty similar to the ledge climbing in games like Tomb Raider. However, half the time instead of grabbing onto the ledge, I'll just fucking fall off for no apparent reason. Why didn't she grab the ledge? I was holding A. Another mechanic that really brings this down is the dodging. By pressing jump in a side or back direction, you can do a sort of dodge move, a short hop. It's decent for avoiding projectiles or backing away from attacks, but it really likes to do this for no reason when I'm just trying to jump to a platform. It led to many very stupid and unnecessary deaths. Once you make it past the castle gate, you'll find yourself in an abandoned mansion that's clearly got some demons and vampires running around. You may have noticed this little clock on the HUD, which is actually another ambitious mechanic that unfortunately ends up being more of a novelty and a waste of time. Castlevania 64 actually features a full day-night cycle throughout the entire game, which is honestly pretty remarkable for the time. Certain events and secrets can only be found depending on the time of day. For example, when you first meet Rosa in the villa, it must be between 3 AM and 6 AM. If you come to the Rose Garden at any other time, she will not be there, and you'll spend a stupid amount of time aimlessly running around. Now who the hell is going to know you're supposed to come meet Rosa at this time? The game never tells you she only shows up here at exactly 3 AM. Talking to Vincent, he'll give you a hint about a girl in the Rose Garden, but he never says when because his ass is always asleep at night. And sure, you can use a sun or a moon card, which will change the time to 6 AM and 6 PM respectively, but that still leaves you standing around doing nothing for 30 fucking minutes real time. Throughout the game, there are also sun and moon doors that are locked to a time frame, so if you don't happen to have any sun or moon cards, then you're just screwed. You gotta stand there and wait. This mechanic, as ambitious as it is, fails to provide any clever design and just hurts the game's overall pacing. Outside the villa's hedge maze, you meet a young boy named Malice. Malice tells you he's been kidnapped and his village burned down. Suddenly, a chainsaw-armed Frankenstein monster and 2 dogs that happen to share a striking resemblance to Zool and Vince from Ghostbusters begin to attack you. You must follow Malice through the hedge maze, all while avoiding these unkillable enemies. This part was just downright frustrating. At first I tried to kill these guys and oh, what do you know, they get right back up and I'm dead. Okay, second try, I actually followed Malice this time and end up losing him. This section is so damn obnoxious because half the time Malice runs too fast, making it very hard to see where he went. I ran around this part for probably 30 minutes before I finally found Malice. We send Malice away into the forest and continue onto the tomb. After defeating the vampire here, we jump into the coffin, and depending on the character you chose, that will determine the level you get to go through. Reinhardt explores the mines, and Carrie explores the underground waterway. Both levels are unique and offer their own gimmicks, like this gondola in the mines, which kind of turns the level into a rail shooter, and the waterway has Carrie controlling waterfalls to progress. Not as dynamic, but the level itself is fine. This brings us to the castle center, the largest and longest stage in the game, and let me just be clear, fuck this area. It isn't so much that it's difficult or it has tricky platforming, it manages to somehow do something worse than either of those things. It's just downright boring and not fun to go through. The level layout itself is fine, it feels sort of like the early levels in the first Castlevania or even Symphony of the Night. What brings it down is the absurd amount of backtracking you have to do. There are multiple rooms that have doors that do not open until all enemies are killed. Okay, whatever, sure. Once you come back around, guess what? The enemies respawn. Every single time. So you have to get this bomb called Nitro to blow up a wall that's all the way at the beginning of the stage, and you're given a warning that's highly explosive, and a single vibration could cause it to explode. So you have to go from one side of the stage all the way to the other without jumping, getting hit, or even touching two walls, or you die. This part is infuriating, and not only does death mean you gotta do it all over again, but it's just not fun. It's boring and monotonous and probably the quickest way to turn me off a video game. Okay, so you place the Nitro down and then you learn, oh, you need a detonator called Mandragora. It's another 15 minutes of backtracking the same 6 rooms, killing the same enemies, doing a bland puzzle, and then walking all the way back just so you can finally end this level that runs 15 minutes over what it should have. Blowing this wall up and activating the magic reveals the next boss, which is this undead bull thing, and I gotta say, this is probably one of the coolest bosses in the game. Depending on where you damage it, its skin starts to melt off, and eventually you can actually immobilize it completely. It's a surprisingly badass dynamic fight that works well for both characters. Following this incredible fight is probably the weakest fight in the game. Depending on your character, you either get Rosa for Reinhardt, or Camilo Fernandez for Carrie. Both fights play out about the same, with either Death or Actress saying some evil stuff and then sicking the boss on the player. You spam attack and the fight's over. Not much else to it. And that's my main issue with Castlevania 64. For every single thing it does right, it manages to do 2 things wrong. The following scene does give a little more character development to Rosa and Carrie, with Reinhardt refusing to kill Rosa and Carrie mourning the loss of her cousin and vowing to avenge her. After the castle center, the game splits the next 4 levels between the 2 characters, with Reinhardt going through the Duel Tower, which is literally just a gauntlet of enemies and some platforming, and the Tower of Execution, which, might I say, heavily resembles Sen's Fortress from Dark Souls. I told you guys I was onto something with the last video. Carrie, on the other hand, gets the Tower of Science, which has gun turrets? Who the hell is Dracula's R&D team?
I'm innocent! You're the murderers! Snake, you should be in this boat!
The Tower of Sorcery is primarily a platforming section, nothing too crazy. You know what doesn't make sense is whose story is canon? Carrie and Reinhardt are usually referred to as the 2 heroes, but how can it be possible they both went through the same exact story, meeting the same characters and doing the same thing without even meeting each other? It doesn't really add up, and I guess you could just not think about it, but at the same time, how can the game refer to them as both a hero when only one story is possible? Reaching the clock tower, our protagonists meet Death and Actress, who by now have had enough of us and decide to take us on themselves. These bosses aren't too bad, but I think Death is definitely the more interesting of the 2. You can pretty much just circle Actress and spam your ball. You can pretty much just circle Actress and spam your orbs at her, while Death requires a little more spatial awareness due to his projectiles, and giant carp attack. Defeating them will grant us access to the final stage in the game, the Castle Keep. I want to point out a cool detail here. Getting to climb up that last flight of stairs like we see in every 2D Castlevania game is really awesome and adds a bit of continuity. Before entering the keep, you're greeted by Renon, the shopkeeper we've seen in all the contracts around the game. Depending on how much money you spent in-game, you might actually have to fight this dude. I didn't end up getting the scene, but it's a neat touch. Getting to the top, we finally see Dracula again and begin the boss fight, which is actually nearly identical to his boss fight from Rondo of Blood, music and all. Depending on which ending you got will determine if your game ends here. So the clock mechanic I mentioned earlier also ties into which ending you get. Taking too long to get to the end of the game will actually have you facing a vampire turned Vincent before fighting Dracula. After defeating Dracula, you're met by Malice, who asks you if Dracula is really dead, to which Carrie/Reinhardt says yes, and they all leave Castlevania to go home. However, you'll notice that something seemed off about Malice. What the fuck? So it turns out the child named Malice is, wow, big surprise, actually a reincarnated Dracula, and the dude we fought earlier was just some wannabe goon of his. Getting the good ending sees this fake Dracula pull a Ganondorf and bring the whole castle down around us. Malice shoots at us on our way out and we're forced to meet him atop the castle. He reveals Dracula's soul was reborn into him and thus begins phase 2 of the fight. After defeating him, he tries playing dumb, and then Vincent shows up, throwing holy water on him. Phase 3 of the fight is a spectacle, with the Dark Lord turning into this dragon thing. We defeat it and finally seal Dracula and Castlevania away once again. The good ending sees Reinhardt reunited with a now cured Rosa, who can now go home and have a life together. And Carrie? Well, I guess Carrie gets to go mourn her family. Not as happy, I guess. And that's the story of Castlevania 64. It's certainly ambitious and tries to have some depth, but it really drops the ball with how flat the characters are. They just don't get enough time to shine. There are a few good scenes, like when Rosa contemplates suicide, not wanting to live as a vampire, but the majority of these characters have like no defining traits. There's little to no build-up of Malice being the reincarnation of Dracula, save for maybe this strange scene in the castle center. Not that you need it, I mean the kid's name was literally Malice, which means evil. But it just would have done every character so much more if we had gotten just a little bit more time with each of them. So, as a game, what do I think? Well, I think the answer is a bit complicated. There is a lot I like about Castlevania 64. It gets the atmosphere, music, and the feel of the series down perfectly. The problems lie in the actual being a fun video game area. Irritating level design, uninspired boss fights, unintuitive platforming, and I didn't even mention the uncooperative camera controls. Castlevania 64 does have the foundation of a good game. I don't even think it's inherently bad, it's just a subpar attempt at bringing one of my favorite franchises into a new era. Castlevania 64's development was pretty troubled and rushed. Tons of content had to be cut in order to get the game out in early 1999. However, only 9 months later, Konami would release Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, an expanded director's cut remaster of the original Castlevania 64. Yeah, if you thought remastering The Last of Us after 10 years was ridiculous, try 9 months. I can't believe they charged full price for both games. I guess they really were ahead of the times with that one. Legacy of Darkness introduces a prequel campaign starring a character cut from the original game, the werewolf known as Cornell. Taking place 8 years before the events of Castlevania 64 in 1844, Cornell's quest involves him traversing Castlevania to stop Dracula's minions from resurrecting the Dark Lord, using his adopted sister, Ada. No, not that Ada. Legacy of Darkness features many of the same stages as the last game, though their layouts have all been remixed and often revamped for the better. The story itself is also much more involved and actually does a great job tying into the original's narrative. Death, Actress, and Gilles de Rais, which is the fake Dracula we fight at the end of Castlevania 64, are working toward eventually resurrecting Dracula. Cornell finds Ada's pendant in the remains of his burned down village and uses his wolfman sense of smell to follow her back to Castlevania. So Cornell's main attack is this energy blade thing, which absolutely shreds through enemies and even bosses. The range on this attack is insane, and it far outclasses Reinhardt's whip and especially carries energy orbs. Pressing the L button will transform Cornell into his wolf form, which uses red jewels as the timer. In wolf form, you take less damage as well as do more damage. Also, you just look cool. Sadly, I hardly actually used the wolf form, since you're already so strong in human form, I didn't even feel the need to activate it, save for maybe the last few bosses, especially with how quick the timer runs down. Cornell meets his childhood friend, Ortega, and is relieved to see him alive. Ortega acts pretty strange here, and yeah, it's obvious this guy betrayed Cornell. Getting to the villa, you actually get to meet the owners of the mansion. After killing the now turned vampire Oldry, we speak to his wife who tells Cornell that her son Henry is lost somewhere in the hedge maze. So, we make our way out to the hedge maze and find Henry running away from, wait, hold on, let me guess, a chainsaw-armed Frankenstein monster. Yeah, this section is still ass, and now it's actually an escort mission. Boy, doesn't everyone love those? Henry, despite being in mortal danger, decides to slowly follow us from 20 feet behind, and if we get too far, he straight up just stops moving. This part sucked in the original Castlevania 64, and it sucks here. It's slightly less annoying because you don't have those two dogs chasing you around, but that's really not saying much. While most of the stages in Legacy of Darkness are just older stages with new layouts, there are actually a few new ones here, like the Tower of Art and the Tower of Ruin. The Tower of Art actually utilizes the day-night mechanic to lock doors, and I will honestly say it's not bad. Sure, it's a bit annoying to go into your inventory every 3 seconds to use the sun and the moon cards, but at the same time, it at least puts some thought and some depth into the time mechanic, making it less of a novelty. The Tower of Ruin is full of traps and pretty identical looking rooms. You're actually supposed to use these maps placed around the stage to gauge where you're at. So I can say at the very least, both the new stages and the older redesigned ones are much better and actually decently fun to travel through. The camera was also greatly improved in this game. Not perfect, but I found myself fighting with it a lot less. The same goes for the platforming. Sometimes that side hop thing would happen, but I felt grabbing onto ledges was much more consistent. Arriving at the clock tower once again, we're faced with a boss, and it's none other than Cornell's childhood friend Ortega. Ortega tells Cornell he wants a final showdown to prove himself, and then transforms into a 3-headed beast. Unfortunately for him, we're Cornell the fucking man beast, and spamming the attack button quickly takes him out. Ortega then compliments Cornell on his strength, and then jumps off the building and fucking explodes? So you're telling me Ortega burnt down the village and sided with Dracula just so he could try and prove he was stronger? Yeah, I'm glad that dude blew up. The clock tower level itself is way more realized with more platforming and even an actual clock face. It's visually a very cool stage. Cornell finds Ada at the top of the clock tower, and at the very last moment, Death shows up and traps her in a giant crystal. Sorta like Zelda towards the end of Ocarina of Time. That's 2 Ocarina of Time references in this video. Cornell makes his way to the very top of the castle keep, and finally meets with who he thinks is Dracula. It's that same dude from earlier pretending. It's pretty much the exact same boss as before, only now, since you're Cornell, you have a very strong ranged attack. Phantom Dracula tells Cornell this isn't the end, and we actually have a true final showdown with the Dark Lord. This design here is awesome. He actually reminds me of Mundus from the first Devil May Cry game. The camera angle is also very cinematic, which does help this fight in being more epic and less anticlimactic. After delivering the final blow, the Dark Lord attempts to retreat with Ada. Cornell, in his last attempt to save his sister, somehow separates his beast form from his human form and trades with Ada. The Dark Lord says this is what he wanted all along and vanishes with the beast form. Cornell and Ada are finally free and spend some time in the forest collecting their thoughts. Henry, the young boy Cornell saves earlier in the game, shows up here, reuniting with Cornell. The post-credits scene depicts Death, Actress, and Giles using Cornell's wolf body to reincarnate Dracula in the body of a child, who would turn out to be Malice. however the hell that works. Castlevania Legacy of Darkness is a refined version of the original Castlevania 64 and is by far the definitive way to play it. For this video, I played Carrie and Reinhardt's stories on the original release, but after completing Cornell's story and the newly unlocked Henry campaign, you can experience the full story with all 4 characters. I had already played this game 3 times in the span of 24 hours, so there was no way in hell I was going to play it again, but I guess Carrie and Reinhardt's campaigns feature new bosses and some level design changes. So we're faced with the question, was Castlevania 64 actually good? Well, I guess that really depends. The original game was certainly ambitious, and you can tell a lot of care and effort was put into it. But the flat characters, subpar level design, and overall jank keeps it from being anything more than an okay novelty of the early 3D era in video games. Legacy of Darkness, on the other hand, improves on the original in pretty much every single aspect. The game runs and looks better, has much more cohesive level design and game mechanics, and it features a ton of content, even if it is most of the same stuff split between 4 campaigns. I didn't hate either of these games. I found myself enjoying them more than I thought I would. I'd say definitely check out Legacy of Darkness. It's the vision the developers intended to ship at launch, and it holds up really well and serves as a nice introduction to the 3D era of Castlevania. And I think that's what makes Castlevania 64 and Legacy of Darkness so fascinating. They're flawed, clunky experiments that tried to reimagine what Castlevania could be in 3D. Both games received enough praise for Konami to keep pushing this new direction, searching for where it all truly began. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching my analysis on Castlevania and Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. And if you didn't see my video on Castlevania's 2D Legacy, you can check that out by clicking this video right here. Until then, I'll be continuing my Forbidden Fate in 1094. Bye-bye!